Obviously, Senator Rand Paul has tested positive for coronavirus, but he was not in contact with anybody who was known positive, and he didn't have any major symptoms. Under your guidelines, under the guidelines that have been outlined here, he would not have gotten a test. He got one anyway. So what do you say to him? He's pointed out that if he hadn't gone basically in defiance of these guidelines and got tested, he might still be showing up to the Senate right now and infecting the whole U.S. Senate.
So that's why this was important. That's why this recommendation to the American people was important. Because we have been saying that there is a level of asymptomatic or mild spread. And that's why each person has to be responsible. Each person has to be responsible in the way that they decrease their interaction with others, the 6 feet. You're all very social distanced, so thank you. But also assuming that everyone that you're interacting with could be positive. And that gets into the hand washing piece, and that gets into the other piece we talked about is surfaces. I think until we really figure out the respiratory transmission versus the surface transmission, and this hard surface transmission, not fabric, will be really critical, because that is a way the virus could spread on subways or metros, where people would be holding on to things that other people had recently held on to. So that's the real question.
But if we can just keep with the example of Rand Paul, and obviously there are many other people that would be in a similar situation, but just keep with this one example. If he hadn't gotten that test, he would still be showing up to the Senate every day, to his place of work.
If he had been following these guidelines, he wouldn't have been infecting others because of the social distancing, washing your hands, doing everything that we talked about. So we've talked about also how people make choices because of their jobs, that they have to come in. You'll notice I was not here over the weekend. I think this is the part that we really need to take personal responsibility for. Saturday, I had a little low-grade fever. So, probably but I'm meticulous. I'm a physician. I ended up piggybacking from Walter Reed, so I got a test later.
Sorry, Reba, I couldn't help myself.
I stayed home another day just to make sure. That's how we protect one another. So, unless everybody's taking their temperature every day, we can't say that he had no symptoms. These are the kinds of things that we have to do for one another. This is the personal responsibility that I'm talking about, that we all have to practice.
Hey, Mr. President, when you say you don't want the cure to be worse than the problem itself, so are you saying that if we kept these measures that we're doing now in place for a couple of months to...
Well, they will be in place. At some point, we're going to open up our country, and it's going to be fairly soon.
Weeks or months? You seem to be
I'm not looking at months, I can tell you right now. We're going to be opening up our country, and we're going to be watching certain areas, and we're going to be practicing everything that Deborah's referring to right here. I mean, we're going to be watching this very closely, but you can't keep it closed for the next, for years. Okay, this is going away. We're going to win the battle, but we also have, you have tremendous responsibility. We have jobs, we have people get tremendous anxiety and depression, and you have suicides over things like this. When you have terrible economies, you have death, probably, and I mean definitely would be in far greater numbers than the numbers that we're talking about with regard to the virus. So we have an obligation, we have a double obligation. We have a great country. There's no country like it in the world, and there's no economy like it in the world. I mean, we were just blazing. We were coming out with numbers that some numbers weren't even reported because it was already this had happened. They were meaningless. I got numbers about myself that were meaningless because by the time the numbers came in, it's a whole different world with this. But I will tell you that we can do both things, John. We can do them both at the same time. I mean, that's okay. What we have gone through is a tremendous learning process, and we've also solved a lot of problems. But we've gone through a tremendous learning situation. Now, we're building hospitals in New York. We're building hospitals in California. We're building hospitals in the state of Washington. We've been in touch with the governors. Today, I spoke with a man that I happen to like. I spoke with Phil in New Jersey, and we're going to be doing something very meaningful in New Jersey. We're doing something. I spoke with J.B. Pritzker, called me today. We're going to be helping them out in Illinois. We're doing a lot of things in Florida. We're doing a lot of things, and between FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers and the Admiral in your group, in terms of the purchasing, that's what he does. He purchases. He's supposed to be great. I'll tell you in about 2 days. But he's going to do a fantastic job. So we have an incredibly talented group of people. But yeah, we'll be doing 2 things and 3 things at one time. Well, at the same time, though, we're going to be watching very closely the hotspots. We're going to be taking care and watching very closely our senior citizens, especially those with a problem or an illness. We're going to be watching them very, very closely. And we can do that and have an open economy, have an open country. And we have to do that because that causes other problems. And maybe it causes much bigger problems than the problem we're talking about now. You understand? Jeff, please.
Mr. President, following up on that same topic and on your tweet, do you think that the cure so far has been worse than the problem?
I think the cure has been very tough. This has been this was an operation. This was somebody going to a doctor and saying, you need an operation. And we've had an operation. We've learned a lot. And we fixed a lot of problems. One of the things we fixed, if you look at the obsolete system that this administration inherited, it wasn't meant for this. It was meant for a small group of people, and even for that, it was not very good and very obsolete. We now have a testing program now that will hopefully be able to be used for many years into the future should we have another event like this. I don't think you'll have another event like this. This is very unique. You look back into time, you look back decades and decades. We can name them all, even if you go back 10 years. You know, you go back to '09, but that wasn't like this, as it turned out. But they lost a lot of people. We were early, Jeff, because of the fact that we closed early. That was a big move. Please, Kristen. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
You had said previously, I think from this podium, that the virus could still be with us through July or August. By suggesting now that we might, or that the government might change these standards or these recommendations.
Well, it's not change. It's no. We're doing things. Yeah, this was a learning experience for the people of the country.
And the time frame has changed for you. The July-August time frame of when you think the virus will be under control.
Well, I think we've learned a lot. I think that there's so much discipline now that we never had. Nobody ever said, don't shake hands. I did actually before I became a politician. Once I became a politician, then it's hard getting used to not doing it. Because, you know, you do it with everybody, with literally thousands of people a week. You're shaking hands with big groups of people. You know, we've learned a lot. There's a great discipline that this whole country has learned, having to do with distancing, having to do with shaking hands. I think a lot of it's going to stay long after the virus is gone. I really think it's probably good practice anyway, but I think it's going to stay long after the virus is gone. But we have to open our country, because that causes problems that, in my opinion, could be far bigger problems. Far bigger. This is a severe medical situation that could cause problems far beyond the medical, and then increase the medical problems to things that had nothing to do with this original medical problem. We can't let that happen to our country. We have the greatest country in the world. I'm not going to let that happen. But this 2 weeks that we have spent has been an incredible learning period and process. Please, Kristen.
For one, you said it's likely going to be weeks, not months, before you suggest easing these guidelines that you put out. Have any of the doctors on your team told you that's the right path to pursue? We
spoke to them today, and I was telling them that we have 2 things to look for. Don't forget the doctors. If it were up to the doctors, they may say, let's keep it shut down. Let's shut down the entire world, because, again, you're up to almost 150 countries. So let's shut down the entire world, and when we shut it down, that would be wonderful. Let's keep it shut for a couple of years. You know, can't do that. And you can't do that with a country, especially the #1 economy anywhere in the world, by far. #1 economy in the world, you can't do that. Because, well, it causes bigger problems than the original. That's why I talk about the cure being worse than the problem. We can't have the cure be worse than the problem. But what we have done So this is not retracing, this isn't anything. We've done it really well because this 2-week period has been good. And I'm not saying it ends at that time. You know, we have another 7 days or so. I'm not saying it ends at that time, but I am saying, sir, it's been like this incredible learning process. That's going to go into the future. That's going to go even as we open up our country. And we're going to be watching New York, and we're going to be watching California. We're going to be watching the state of Washington and other places. Illinois is becoming a hotspot. And we can do both. Now, we may quarantine. I mean, we will be quarantining many people in these areas. There are other areas that just aren't affected, or they're affected very little. And why would we close down 100% of the country? There are areas within New York where New York will be open, but there are areas within New York. Remember this, New York has the New York Stock Exchange. It has NASDAQ. It has the exchanges. To close the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and with all of the great work they're doing, I mean, they've gone largely to computer. You look at the floor, it's incredible what they can do, but it's fully open. But we don't want to be doing that. But we can do, what I'm saying basically is that we can do 2 things simultaneously. And we've had this incredible learning period. Plus, people have been in a period and they won't be calling, oh, gee, because I've got many, many people that now come to me and say, we get it. We think we can really do it now and do it while we're open. So at some point, we'll be setting some guidelines. We'll be setting some datelines. And we'll be announcing them in the not-too-distant future.
Any of the doctors on your team endorsed easing the federal guidelines?
Not endorsed. We talked together, and I think they're okay with it, and I'm okay with it. But this could be a much bigger problem. This could create a much bigger problem than the problem that you start off with. Now, other nations are going to have to do what they're going to do, but they'll probably do something very similar. But in our case, much more so than anyone else, because of the magnitude of our economy, the tremendous size of what we've built and what we have, and the jobs involved. You know, you have almost 160 million jobs in this country now, the most ever, by far the most ever. The number of jobs, almost 160 million. So we can't turn that off and think it's going to be wonderful. There'll be tremendous repercussions. There will be a tremendous death from that. Death. You know, you're talking about death. Probably more death from that than anything that we're talking about with respect to the virus.
If we continue with these strict guidelines than if we ease them?
No, I think we're going to do them both. I think that's what I'm saying. I think we can do them both. Now, we haven't announced a date, but we're getting fairly close to coming up with a date, and it's a much shorter period of time than I've been hearing the news report. And I think everybody should be happy with that. But great knowledge was gained. Please.
I had two questions for you, Mr. President. My second one is on what your economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, said today. He was talking about this, and he said that there are going to have to be some difficult trade-offs if you do ease these guidelines, because he wants the economy.
You mean with the Democrats you're talking about?
No. He was talking about how you said, the cure shouldn't be worse than the problem, and he was talking about reopening the businesses, getting the economy going again. What are those difficult trade-offs?
Well, it is true. I mean, if he said, I didn't hear him say that, but if he said difficult trade-off, sure, it's less convenient. Before you walk and you hop in the subway and you grab the handle and you go down to wherever you're going on Wall Street and you do all sorts of things and you go in and you open the doors going into your great buildings or into the exchanges, and now you're not going to have to maybe think about doing that, or you're going to think about doing it a different way. No, there are many trade-offs. It's a different life, and maybe it'll remain that way, frankly, after the invisible scourge is gone. Maybe it's going to stay that way. Not a bad thing to stay that way, but no, there are trade-offs. There's no question about that. But I actually think I think in the end we're going to end up being bigger, better, and stronger. We have learned a lot. Please.
We're seeing an increase of cases in Latin America, in the Middle East,
true.
in some places in Asia. Are you considering a new round of travel ban?
No, we're not really. Something like that could happen, I guess, but we're not really. They thought we were going to have bans within the United States. We didn't do that. We're not going to have that. Hopefully that'll take care of itself. No, in Latin America there's been an uptick. Yeah, please.
Just quickly, a second question. What prompted you to say at the beginning of your comments that you're going to take care of the
Asian Americans? Has there been something in particular that was
Yeah, because it seems that there could be a little bit of nasty language toward the Asian Americans in our country, and I don't like that at all. These are incredible people. They love our country, and I'm not going to let it happen. So I just wanted to make that point. Because they're blaming China, and they are making statements to great American citizens that happen to be of Asian heritage, and I'm not going to let that happen. Please.
You said you want to reopen the country, but most schools across the country are closed. 2 states now are closed for the rest of the school year. How are parents supposed to go back to work and educate their children?
Yeah, the governors of the various states will have a lot of leeway. If we open up, and when we open up, the governors in certain states, for instance, you go to some of the states I just mentioned, those schools are going to be open. Many cases they're open now, but the schools are going to be open. In other cases, Governor Cuomo, Gavin Newsom of California, certain governors are going to maybe have a decision to make. Now, they may make a decision to keep them open in a certain part of New York and maybe in Westchester County or wherever it may be, they'll keep them closed. But they're going to have leeway. We're giving the governors a lot of leeway.
Do you agree with the decision to close it several months out at this point? These governors are saying they're expecting a peak in the next couple of months and have made the decision.
The governors are going to make those decisions. That's going to be up to the governors. And they're very capable. They'll be able to make the decisions. Please.
Sir, will you explain why a $2 trillion economic stimulus is needed if you are going to reopen the country in a period of weeks, not months?
Because the virus has had a big impact on our country. So we're going to give a stimulus so that the workers can live their life. It was not their fault. It wasn't the workers' fault. And we are going to give a kick so that it's a kick. And this way, we think the workers can get a fair start. The small businesses we're taking very good care of. We want to take care of these small businesses. They really are the engine of this country. A lot of people don't know that. You know, everyone thinks of these great, big, beautiful businesses, who, by the way, have been very badly hurt also. But the small businesses have really historically been the engine, and they still are the engine of the country. And you'd be amazed. The workers love those businesses, and the workers contact us, and they want us to help those businesses because that's where they've made their living. That's where they've been paid a lot of money over the years. And, you've been seeing what's happened over the last 3 years where salaries and wages have gone up very substantially for those workers. And then we got caught by this sudden craziness coming into our country and coming all over the world. So we need to make sure that the companies are strong and that the workers are strong, and that's what we're doing. And hopefully the Republicans and Democrats are going to be able to make a deal, and they're actually fairly close, but we'll see what happens. Please.
But does it still need to be $2 trillion is my question. Can it be
Well, one of the things you're going to have to save companies that have been shattered. You're going to have to save various, you know a lot of the companies yourselves. We have a company that was, I think, the greatest company in the world, named Boeing. Boeing's going to need some help. Now, Boeing had some difficulty before. That's unlike others. We have other companies that didn't have a problem coming in. Boeing had the obvious problem that everybody knows about from a little more than a year ago, a double problem, and it was a big one. And then on top of it, as they're getting ready to really show their stuff, on top of it, we all get hit by this. And obviously, the airlines are going to have a problem, but the airlines aren't going to be buying from Boeing or from anybody else right now because of this difficulty. So we have to work with the airlines. We have to work with the cruise lines. We have to work with the companies like a Boeing, because Boeing's potentially, again, a great company. It had a very rough period of 13 months, a very rough period, a horrible period, an unbelievable period. If you would have told me this would have happened to Boeing, I wouldn't have believed it, because to me it was, truly one of the truly great, probably almost 1 point of GDP, if you can think of that. It's hard to believe that a company can have that kind of an impact. But Boeing, we have to work with it for two reasons. Number one, it's a great company that we have to save. Number two, it produces unbelievable numbers of jobs. And so, the numbers have to be reflective of that kind of a thing. Please, you know what I'm going to do? We have wonderful people behind us that are working very hard, and we want Bill to get back to the Department of Justice, and we want the Admiral to start going and doing your job, and the same thing with Deb. If anybody would have any questions, maybe I'll ask Mike to stay around, but if anybody would have any questions for the group, and otherwise I'll let them go back to work.
We just clarify, Dr. Brooks, we seem to be talking about different geographical slopes on this. The curve would be changing. And yet you just said that 28% numbers coming out of New York gives an indication that we don't quite know when the seeds, to use your metaphor, were planted. So how confident are you on the start dates of each curve for each of the geographical areas that the president seems to be indicating we'll be adjusting the policy for?
So that's a very good question. So what we do know is now we can backtrack from people who get very seriously ill to when they probably got infected versus when they were exposed. And so when you start backing out each of those pieces, when you start seeing hospitalized patients, you know that the virus has probably been there for 3 to 4 weeks, substantially circulating within the population. So that's what we're looking for. Now, as all of our testing is improved, and we want to really applaud the group who has worked on it. You know, if you look at the pandemic flu preparedness, all of this was built on a flu platform. It was never, ever thought that you'd have a simultaneous respiratory disease hitting at exactly the same time as your flu hits in the country. And so when you're doing all of your flu surveillance, you could had small cases of these pneumonias and flu-like illnesses characterized as a flu-like illness for the last 4 to 6 weeks. And so that's really a caution to all of us. And so when we get through all of this, we'll be looking at each of the pandemic preparedness plans. A long way of saying we know Washington State is a little bit ahead of New York because of the hospitalization records. What we will get to as a country with the amount of testing that will be available is being able to do what the president talked about simultaneously doing containment contract tracing at the same time you're doing mitigation. And I think right now we put everything into mitigation. Yet if we geographically get specific data by zip codes and counties, we'll be able to approach this in a very laser-focused way, making sure that what we're doing in each of those areas is absolutely appropriate for where they are in their own little bell-shaped curve.
Dr. Brooks,
When will the government roll out the antibody tests so people can know possibly if they've been exposed?
So several of them have come to the FDA, I believe. Obviously, that's something I'm very interested in for 2 reasons. One, it will give us a retrospective on where these infections were, who was actually infected, and how really asymptomatic versus mild versus all of that comes into the spectrum. Secondly, by people who have high titers of those antibodies, those can become our solution with plasmapheresis for those in need and the making of hyperimmune globulin. So knowing who they are becomes really critical. But I think we're still a couple of weeks out. I have to go back and talk to the FDA where each of these are, because this is what saved us with when you do flu swabs, when you do strep throat swabs, and now where you could do an HIV test. So these are the kinds of tests that we know will be critical in the future. I wanted to say one other thing, because you see a lot of numbers out there about 70% of the population is going to get infected, or 60% of the population based on those models. Understand that the way you get to that number is you do nothing, and it goes through 3 cycles. So they're talking about this cycle that we're currently in, another cycle in 2021, and a third cycle in 21-22 in order to get that level of population infected. And you know we will have vaccines most likely by the 21-22 season. And we're going to hopefully have therapeutics in the fall of the next season. So the reason we're so much focused on blunting the curve for this piece is if the virus comes back, we'll have much more facility both for diagnosis, testing, monoclonal antibodies, treatments, and then the vaccine.
And Dr. Brooks, a question about the serology blood tests, which some people said hold some real promise here. When will those be FDA approved, and when will they be widely available?
So that's what she was just asking about. So these IgGs and IgM, both point of care, I can tell you it would be no problem making ELISA today. But then you're drawing blood, you're processing blood, you're running plates. That's what we did in the past. We really want a finger prick type assay where you can just put a fingerprint on and get your IgG and IgM. So that's what we're working on right now.
Realistically, how long until that's approved and available with you?
I can't answer because I have to look at where each of the companies are that are in their development processes.
That sounds like a while then.
Well, there's some that are developed now that they were using in Singapore. So we're looking at those to see how those work.
Should be fairly quick.
So we're looking at those, but we're very quality oriented because we want to make sure we don't give people false negatives or false positives.
I have a question for you. So we have a lot of very angry media all around this room, and they want one of these seats. But because of social distancing, we are keeping them empty. And they are keeping them empty. Will there ever be a time when all of those really angry people who don't like me much to start off with, but now they really don't like me, will there ever be a time when these seats are full to the brim like it used to be, where people are almost sitting on each other's lap? And this whole row over here is packed, and now they're outside wanting to get in, and they're very jealous of all of these reporters. Will we ever have that again, or is that something that will be, it'll look like this forever?
So we're learning a lot about social distancing and respiratory diseases. And I think those are the discussions we have to have in the future. It was what you were talking about, changing our whole behavior patterns of what we touch and being conscious of that. I remember when I was worried Saturday morning, I was trying to think, what all did I touch on Friday? Did I touch a doorknob? Did I do this? Did I do that? Did I not wash my hands? I mean, you go through this whole piece. Did I touch my face by accident? So I think this awareness that we all now have that we didn't have before, where we would have pushed through that door or turned that doorknob because we were in such a hurry. Now I think all of us think twice. I think all of you think twice.
But when the virus is gone, will the people be allowed to sit next to each other again, in your opinion, in a tight room with a tight...
I don't know. You'll have to look and see if we have a new respiratory piece. Certainly, this is the way we set up every clinic all around the world when we're worried about TB and TB transmission.
I'm wondering if you could comment on the new measures that Britain has put into place. Also, Germany has said it doesn't want to have crowds of less than 2 people except for families, which is a pretty restrictive number. Does that inform your thinking as you are coming up with advice for this next period for the president and vice president?
The president and vice president have asked us to look at every single scenario in every single country. Because the more data we have, the more our decisions can be completely data informed and really understanding what impact that has. I mean, we're interested right now. I mean, Italy obviously waited until about March 7th. The virus had been circulating for almost 4 weeks before actually going into that methodology. But for the first time, it looks like their mortality rates are starting to decline, which would be an illustration that things that they did 2 and 3 weeks ago may actually have an impact. Those are the kinds of data we're looking at very carefully, as well as very careful data within the United States of exactly where the virus is, what's the attack rate, has it moved out of its more confined geography, and really looking at each of those pieces of information. It's a lot of data to go through.
What do you make of Germany and Britain's moves?
Well, I think if you remember just a week ago, Britain had a very different approach. So everybody is adapting to their data. I haven't looked at the data that informed that decision, so I can't really comment on how they got to that decision there or in Germany.
Just to be clear, do you agree with the president's push to reopen the country? He said some of his doctors that he's talking to about this, he says, I think they're okay with it. Are you okay with that?
What the president has asked us to do is to assemble all the data and give him our best medical recommendation based on all the data. That's what he's asked us to do. And so that's what we'll be doing this week. We were going to have to do it this week anyway because we had to make a decision come Monday about the 15 days to reduce social spread. So this is consistent with our mandate to really use every piece of information that we can in order to give the president our opinion that's backed up by data, not our perception, but our opinion that's backed up by data.
Data now, you think you could in a week? Like, what would your assessment be of right now?
Well, we're pulling all of the data pieces in now, and that's really critical. I will never speculate on data. I will have to see the data in order to really understand it.
And I think a big factor is the mortality rate. We're talking about the mortality rate. You know, when we first started, people were thinking about 3 and 4%, and now we're talking about a much lower number than that. I think it's a number that will be a lot different than people thought.
The mortality rate is driven almost exclusively, as we have talked about, by people with pre-existing conditions and older. So that has become, from the very beginning, that was our emphasis. You know, when we started 2 or 3 weeks ago talking with one another, our focus has been on how do we protect those with pre-existing conditions and the elderly. And I think these steps were about protecting with pre-existing conditions. So the whole key to changing the mortality rates is not just the hospital care, but preventing them from going into the hospital to begin with, because you don't want them to be infected.
It's much lower than we originally thought. I mean, frankly,
yes,
it's a lot lower.
Well, you know what the estimate in Wuhan was originally? It was over 3%. When they look outside of Wuhan, it was about 0.7%. It depends very much. In South Korea, it was about 0.7, 0.8%. But I don't want, that's like a tyranny of averages. And that's not having, that's probably missing 50, 60% of the data because no one was testing asymptomatics. Remember, in every country, you had to be symptomatic to get a test. So we're making case fatality rates when we're missing a significant part of the data. So if anything, it will go lower, but I don't want that should not be reassuring because the death rates escalate with age and pre-existing conditions. So I really want to be clear that although it may be very low if you're under 40 or very low if you're under 50 and very low if you're under 70, there is an inflection curve. The average age of the person who's dying in Italy is in the mid-80s. So there is really a significant issue in our older generation that we feel strongly about protecting.
But Dr. It's just very interesting, the whole thing. It's an incredible subject. When somebody is very sick, they go to a doctor, go to a hospital, they record it, they're very sick, and then they live or they don't live, see what happens. But when somebody isn't very sick at all, I've heard people that they don't even know they had it and they're healing. Then I've heard people they have like a cold or they have a running nose, or even people that stay home and they think they have the flu, or in some cases they think they have a really bad case of the flu. But all of those people, that vast majority of, beyond vast majority of people, they're not reporting, they're not calling the doctor, they're not calling him, they're just getting better. So you would think it would have to be because the people that are sick are going to a doctor or they're going someplace and they're going to say, make me better. The people that are just short of that, and people that aren't even, you have many people where they literally don't even know that they have it. So now you're building up the number of cases that we talked about before, and yet, so you don't know you don't know how many there are. It could be a vast number. But what you do know is all the people that are really sick, because all of the people that are really sick are going to a doctor in some form, and the doctor is reporting it in all cases. So,
but that's why your question about the antibody test is so critical, because that will give us really a much better baseline to really understand.
So Mr. President, when you talk about how it could be a much, much bigger problem, you said that at several stages on whether or not we keep these guidelines in place. You talk about higher death. Are you talking about suicide? Like, help us understand.
Is the risk about many forms?
Is the risk of depression? Is that what you're getting at?
We're talking about tremendous. Look, number one, it's the country itself. You're talking about tremendous disruption economically, but you're talking about massive depression, massive numbers of suicide.
You mean economic depression?
No, I'm not talking about economic, although you could be talking about that too.
So what
I'm talking about is
depression.
People suffering massive depression because they had a fantastic job and now they have no idea, what's going on. Now, here's the good news. If they get the bill passed, we're taking care of those people. We're going to really take good care of those people, beyond what any country has done for people. But there's never been anything like this. No, I'm talking about where people suffer massive depression, where people commit suicide, where tremendous death happens. Now, in addition to that, we're talking about economic, where you really hurt a country. It could take years and years to recover. And the longer you stay out, the harder it is to recover. I happen to think that you're going to have, they call it the V. I think you're going to have a very big bounce back. I think it's going to be very big. We'll see. Well, I think the bill should pass. It should pass quickly. Take care of our workers. Take care of the companies that pay those workers. Help those companies over this rough patch. But the longer it takes, the harder it is to come back. I'd like to be able to bounce back to where we were. And ultimately, I think we're going to be even further than that. But I'm just saying that what's happening when I say the cure, and the cure could be worse than the problem itself, right? That's what, we can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. We've learned so much, and so many good things are going to happen for our country. We can't let this continue to go on. So what we're doing is we're meeting with the doctors, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and others, and we've already started the discussion. And I can say that, I'm a student like your students. We're all learning this together. I learned a lot from Deborah. I learned a lot from Tony. I learned a lot from a lot of people that this has been their life's work. I've learned a lot. We're going to come up with a date. And we're going to do two things. We can do two things at one time. At the same time, we're going to be very vigilant. We're going to be so vigilant in terms of all of the things that we have to do that we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks ad nauseum. And I think it's going to be ultimately a far better solution for our country. Yeah, please, go ahead.
What advice is Dr. Fauci?
Yeah, why don't you go back? And we want her to go back to work. Thank you. Great job. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah. Deborah? Come on. They won't let you go.
So there's still 1 week left to go and 15 days to slow the spread. Doesn't talk of reopening the government quickly undermine that? I mean, why would anyone today still social distance or not run out to see
Actually,
the
it should
trade
reinforce it. Because if people know that we're considering and trying to understand the impact of the good work that they have done, I think it reinforces them to do good work for the next whatever it is, days, weeks in the future. Because it says to them, we're looking very carefully at the impact that the work that you did, the selflessness that you brought to this, the ability to stay home with your fabulous children, your ability to social distance, the ability to give up on going to restaurants and just having takeout, all of those sacrifices, the ability of your protecting our elder generation, the greatest generation, and making sure they're safe in nursing homes but not seeing them. All of us have made sacrifices. I haven't seen my grandchildren in 3 weeks. I know other people are like that they have really made those personal sacrifices. What we're asking every American to do is to make those personal sacrifices for these next week and now, so that we can evaluate the impact of that sacrifice. So I think, if anything, it strengthens the willpower to say, yes, I can do this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, Sir, can I ask you, where is Dr. Fauci today?
Go ahead. 1 second, please.
Sir, one thing some public health officials have said would be helpful is to open back up the ACA exchanges so that people who are worried about perhaps getting treatment could go sign up for insurance now, even though the open enrollment period is open. That's something you can do with
Well, it is. It's something we're talking to a lot of people about. We'll see what happens, but we're talking to people about it. Go ahead, please.